Welcome to the Hard Things About IP, where we dive into the world of intellectual property and the hard things about it with experts from various industries. Today, I am joined by Danielle Lewensohn, an experienced IP professional who will share her insights into their journey, challenges, and thoughts on the future of IP. Let's jump right in. To start, could you briefly introduce yourself, who you are, where you are from, and your current role? Also, just out of curiosity, at what age did you first start working with IP?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to your pod. Really excited. So my name is Danielle Lewensohn, and I'm heading the IP department at RaySearch. It's a leading software developer in radiation therapy, and my company collaborates with hospitals and clinics all over the world. And my colleagues are developing software that helps to improve the delivery of radiation with the ultimate goal to help patients with cancer. And I've been in my role for almost 8 years now. And you asked me when I came into IP, how old I was, and I had to think back. And I think it's fair to say that I was about 24 years old when I knocked on the door to one technology transfer office in the United States where I was studying at the time, because I was already curious of this field, which I didn't have much introduction to, but I got more introduction there. So I think that was sort of the triggering point when I was working there for a short while at the intersection of research, IP, and commercialization.
Wow. Okay. You are a very tough person then, that you decided to do that. And as you know, Danielle, everyone has a different path into the intellectual property, right? What inspired you to pursue for a career in IP, and how did your journey begin? And was there a particular moment that, sparked your interest, or did you find yourself in IP by chance,
Well, I think it's a very good question, because unfortunately, I would say most people with an engineering degree or business degree don't really get exposed to this topic of IP management, which is really a lot of different underlying themes. So in my case, I think I took 1 or 2 classes with the engineering program that I attended, and then it was an accumulation of things. I think I was interested in this field because it is interdisciplinary to some extent, even though it's very technical as well. But it was really there at the University of Chicago, where I was working for a short while, where IP was really central to anything they did. And that triggered more of an interest, even though, as I said, I had a little bit of a background before even coming there. And then I worked in different industries, and I think that's what's very intriguing about IP. I've been in the biotech industry working with vaccines 20 years ago when no one was talking about vaccines. And I've also worked in the legal service industry, where you yourself find you and your company. And I have, since 8 years worked with software. And I've also had the opportunity to do a doctoral degree focusing on patent data. So in my case, I've really been able to carry this backpack of IP management and IP knowledge in various contexts, which I find interesting.
Wow. That's very interesting, really interesting. And also that, as you said, that you did the pursue for the PhD, right, in patent information.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay. And as we know, IP is a very dynamic field, right? And no 2 days are the same. Could you maybe give us a quick rundown of what a typical week looks like in your role?
Right. No, as you're saying, it's really diverse if you're an IP manager. And I love that aspect of the work, because you get to interact with the inventors, and you also get to interact with a lot of providers that are needed, sophisticated providers of systems and different services. So that aspect is great. So one typical week could be about negotiating prices with one of these providers or patent law firms, external law firms that are needed, since patent rights are national rights. So we need, representation in every country where we want patent rights. But also one thing that I am very interested in is it's the workflow, how we can bring everyone to the table in a smart way. It's complex data we're dealing with, and the processes are sometimes quite cumbersome. So I've been working quite a lot with improving the processes and the systems and how we interact with those systems.
And thinking about the podcast's name, I mean, it's called The Hard Things About IP for a reason, right?
Yeah.
Let's be honest, it's not always easy. And I think we both can confirm that. And you touched a little bit about some challenges, processes. What are the biggest challenges, you face managing IP in your company? And if you had to name up 3, what would they be? And have you found any strategy to still deal with them? I mean, after so many years.
Right. Well, I think sort of the overlaying issue typically has to do with translation and transparency of information. And that might be generic to most workflows or departments in a company. But given that I find myself to a great degree working, project-based and virtually and internationally at the same time, it's super important to try to improve, all the underlying steps for a workflow, whether it's patent filing or even paying the renewal fees. And it's not as simple as you get a provider and they do it for you. You obviously have to work with your data in a smart way so that you don't duplicate data or workflows. So I think that part, how can we be transparent with the data so that everyone that touches that data understands how to do that in a smart way? That's one aspect. Another aspect that I think a lot of IP managers would agree with me, or I think so at least, is the sort of internal prioritization within a company. I mean, obviously we need to make money in order to be able to invest in further innovation. And you have a limited number of people doing that. So, and typically those people are also the very inventive ones. So there is always sort of, you have to deal with resource allocation. That's another aspect, I think, for R&D heavy and very innovative companies. And then another aspect is, of course, awareness. Therefore, I appreciate you're doing this pod and all the work you yourself are doing, because I think bringing different competences to the table is key here. And without doing that, you can't really talk about improving any processes, right? First, you have to bring everybody to the table, and you need to make this kind of complex stuff more explainable to everybody. That's sort of the first step. But I think those 3, transparency, understanding the data, and prioritization, and also, maybe speaking the same language.
Yeah, very true, very true. And this is more like an extra question going deeper into this. And then how do you convince, your colleagues, the management, to support you there? Do you have a specific trick, or, is it just you?
I wish I knew the trick. Well, I must give credit to the inventor pool. We have a lot of inventors that have contributed over the years to RaySearch patent portfolio. And then, of course, we have more people that have contributed and contributes to our product development. So I think it's very important to give everyone credit from R&D. People are highly innovative. So I think the tricky part is to get people over the threshold of, oh, okay, IP, patenting, why, once you get them over that threshold, I mean, we're talking about highly intelligent people here, and also people that are very humble, I find. So when it comes to, at least my experience, I have mostly positive experience of working with R&D. The challenging things have been the fact that it's very deep knowledge that we're dealing with, and we have 35% are have PhDs within the company, typically within physics or math. And while I have a PhD in innovation management, that doesn't help me that much sometimes when we have very tricky understanding of underlying math and things like that. But I think the challenging part, and where you always have to work with people, is again the prioritization. How do you internally sort of compete, because there are so many things you have to do. And if I may remind you, like, our company is highly regulated by the FDA and the EMEA. So not only do we have to get our products on the market, we have to do that while being regulated. So we have that layer. It's almost, I've heard the term regulatory lasagna, and I think the people in quality and regulatory would agree, because there's so many layers, and you have new acts coming into play from the European Union, for instance, such as the AI Act and the Data Act, and these things, I mean, are vital that we comply with, and sometimes then IP is sort of put aside a little bit, not because people don't want to pitch in, but there's just not enough time or resources. So that's a struggle, but I think that's a struggle that most IP managers have, whether they are super regulated or not. And I think it's really about, remove all the data, all the legalese or patentees, and come to the table and talk. That's how you build a good patent portfolio, or a portfolio at all, in my mind. But it takes time also. It's not done over a weekend.
You make it sound so easy. It's interesting.
I'm not sure about that.
Very good. And from your experience, Danielle, what are the most common mistakes companies make from, when handling IP? And of course, it doesn't have to be about the company you are in today, but in general, I mean, you have been in this space for many, many years. What do you think it is?
I think it's a very good question. I would have to think, but I think the lack of awareness is not only understanding, for instance, that you need to file a patent application before you publish a scientific paper, for instance. I think a lot of people in R&D, they get that. However, I think it's challenging when you have a lot of collaboration externally, because once you have that, you have a lot of information, flowing back and forth between parties. And you might have, legal contracts regulating that flow of information, but then you might have people, typically engineers, that aren't familiar on how to interpret the activities they do in relation to what's written once upon a time, many months or many years before they actually start a research project. So I think that is one of the biggest challenges. And I'm all for open innovation, and most companies are much more open today than even 10 years back. And I mean, that goes across multiple industries, right? But I still think, when it comes to understanding IP implications or considering IP, we have vulnerabilities in collaboration. And I don't think the issue is regarding, filing patent application or the patent management workflows necessarily. I think the issues lie, again, in things that, might be unexpected coming out of a research collaboration. How do you handle that? And how do you get a sense for when to share and when to not share? I mean, that's not easy at all for human beings. And collaboration is typically a good thing. But you also have different cultures, and, in the space we're in, people want to help, preferably eradicate cancer, fight cancer. So we want to do anything we can in collaboration with the clinics that we're working with, obviously. But I ultimately don't think one thing excludes the other. I just think it's about creating awareness and cross-functional discussions, why is this important and when can we do what? Yeah.
Super relevant what you say. And Danielle, in addition to this, managing IP efficiently becomes more and more complex, right? As you grow, and I mean, you have followed your company for many, many years. When is the right time, based again on your experience, for a company to invest in an IP management system? Is obviously, the first question I have into this. And then the follow on that would be, is there a clear sign that a company has reached that level of maturity?
It's a very interesting question. And these days, of course, everyone is talking about agentic AI. And I'm thinking, do I really need a system in the future? Because I've been all about, obviously you need to manage this in a highly qualitative and efficient way. You can't do it, typically you can't do it off an Excel sheet if you have, more than a few patent applications to manage. But, I mean, in my experience, I have met companies that are larger than ours with larger patent portfolios that still work off an Excel sheet. And I think you can do it if you have a lot of trust and a lot of control mechanisms and a lot of people. You can do it because it's about the behavior of the people. However, my preference is not to rely on people that much for admin tasks. I would like to move beyond Excel, if you know what I mean. So I really think it's important, if you have, set the strategy that you should try to secure intellectual property rights, trademarks, patents in the next 3, 4, 5 years. I would say you need a system of some sort. The issue, I think, has been that a lot of the systems have been, in a way, they've carried too much of a costume for smaller companies, smaller players. They've paid, like smaller startups and others have paid a lot of money for a lot of features that they will never use. So I think there's a bit of a mismatch there in the market of IPMSs in general, and there are a few players that are understanding this need of the customers. But I'm really excited for the future of systems, processes, how we do this, whether it's by, the cool things of agentic AI, what it can do to our workflows, or whether it's about how we ultimately, what you've done, since many years back, bring the experts to the table. We've yet to see that with most systems. Most systems are built for IP professionals and not for non-IP professionals in that sense, which is a mismatch in itself, because if you're looking at companies with big R&D departments, you have more people in R&D than in IP. So I would like to see that relationship be inverted, please, in the future. I think that's also would hopefully generate more curiosity in IP, and ultimately we would focus more on the content rather than, the administration was quite heavy, as we know, in IP.
I know, again, very valuable what you just said, right? It's there is really not a recipe, right, that everybody could follow. As you said, it can be on the company size, it can be on the people. But in the end of the day, I think it's important, and a person like you, right? You have to define, for the company when are we ready, right? And that's really not easy, as you said, not an easy task, because once you start in that step and you don't have solutions that can support you, because as you also touched upon, not everybody has an IP department, right, with 20 people or 25. So it's always a combination of how to involve people, but that's a good one.
I was going to say that I think it does require, just fetching certain data points requires a lot of competence. And I would like to see that be more democratized, if you will, in the future, so that you can have the board quickly get an appreciation for a company's IP or competitor IP. It's still quite tricky to get a quick view.
Talking about competitors, actually, one of the hard things about IP is staying ahead of the competition, right? Mm-hmm. I can imagine that you're not the only company, most probably in your space, that wants to solve these things. How can companies benefit from, monitor the competitor patents is my first question. And the question I also have to you and your organization is that how does that influence your strategy when something appears that wasn't there half a year ago? I would love to hear your opinion here.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's a strategic choice always, whether you monitor your competitors or not, or how you do that. It has to be a strategic choice, because otherwise you're putting a business decision onto a department or function that doesn't sit on the rest of the information with regards to business decisions necessarily. So I think it has to be a conversation, really top down actually, or with whether you do that. And I do think that if you are in a startup or in a sort of pre-financing mode, it's vital that you have a look at this piece of data in some way. And also for granting bodies that give research grants, I think they ought to look. And obviously it's going to depend on what context you're working in. If it's pharmaceuticals or mechanics, just going blindly into an area, I wouldn't recommend. But given that now we're seeing this surge of cool tools, and that for the first time, I think we're opening Pandora's box. And I think your software is also very helpful in that with AI applications, that we've just seen a little bit of what it can do. And I'm very curious to see what happens with monitoring and understanding the competitive landscape. I think we're getting towards something I was thinking a lot when I did my PhD thesis. How can we use innovation data, not only patent data, but also commercialization data across the board, in order to understand the competitive situation, or whether we have something truly new and inventive. And I do believe that the experts in a field, they should really be central to monitoring how that's done. So there are within the profession, you have search specialists, but I would like to see more of a democratization, so that everyone in this particular field can be a specialist. And I think we will have more efficient processes then for monitoring. You had a second question, which I forgot.
I think you touched upon it already. Now, the question was like, when you get that influence, right, from the outside, as you said, you're using patent information, does that impact your strategy as a company?
Interesting. I think depending on where you are in your innovation journey and commercialization journey, it can really affect certain strategic choices. And completely going blindly into this, it's like going into the woods and not understanding what path you're allowed to walk on. There is a clear path once you've sort of cleared a little bit in the woods. But if you're just, walking on unknown land, it can be pretty scary. Yeah, I mean, you can meet some wolves and you could be eaten, right? Alive. So I think that analogy goes very much for IP. At the same time, having a patent or not is most likely not something that will, tip your business. But it could. And therefore, it's super important to have this conversation early, or when you're shifting, business focus. And it's important to have a broad, holistic conversation, not only about securing certain patents, but securing control of the knowledge, whether that is through contracts, patents, trade secrets, people that are working. There's been acquisition of whole companies for the people skills, right? I think it was one case in robotics a few years back where a whole company was bought because, the other company wanted control. I mean, it's nothing new. IP is a part of this puzzle. And I do think if you are investing in business analytics and ignoring patent data, then you need to think twice. Wouldn't you agree?
Totally. And and I love the analogy. I never heard about that, but I will use it if it's okay with you. That was a good one.
Absolutely. No copyright on my part. I think that lies otherwise.
Okay. So the freedom to operate is completely okay then.
Absolutely.
Okay. Talking about IP, right? When you just mentioned studies and I would say including EPO's annual reports that you see every year. I mean, they show every year that companies with strong IP strategies tends to outperform those without. Do you think that your company would be less successful without an IP strategy in place? Number one. And number two, what impact does it have on a long-term growth?
It's, of course, a very interesting question. And one might have to be the devil's advocate here and pose the question, what happens if you don't have an IP strategy? What happens if you're not investing in securing IP for the knowledge that you have, the unique knowledge that you have? It might be quite costly, actually. So I think there are some ideas out there about IP, and sometimes that people think it's pretty evil and very costly. And it is costly, but if you think about property rather than intellectual property, you do need, if you want to manufacture something, you might need to secure, the factory and the processes and everything. So in our case, given that we are very research intensive, I think we always need to balance. There's a lot of knowledge, and it's again shared knowledge and very fragmented. So I see IP as a toolbox to control some of these pieces in this very fragmented ecosystem. I do believe that there should be a balance with patents and publications. We are a software company, so it's quite hard in our context to detect infringement. If you're a pharmaceutical company or biotech company, I think a person in my position would say, obviously it's very tied to our revenue streams, and I can show you how. With software, it's not necessarily as easy to pinpoint, okay, here's my patent and here's my revenue stream tied to that particular part of our product or that is covered by the patent. So I do believe that you always need to have a holistic view, and it's going to depend on the context. I also like, again, to turn the question, what if we didn't? What happens then with competition if they start to patent things that we thought was common knowledge, for instance, or everyone does this, or it's not worthwhile, the case? I mean, then you end up in a situation where you might be sued for infringement, right? And that energy and money that goes into handling such activities can be quite detrimental for a company. So you really have to think, strategically about this. What is the cost of not having? I guess that would be my final answer to that question. Sorry for being a bit lengthy.
No, but super valid. I think you really put it in a very nice way that many, I would say, companies tends to forget, because exactly what you said. What if you don't, and what if your competitor starts to file patents? What happens with the freedom to operate? I mean, you're really on it. You're really on it. Again, you make it sound so easy, but that's the reason why you are where you are, most probably.
We know it's not easy, and we know it's a teamwork and continuous learning, I would say.
Definitely. I mean, when we started this conversation, you and I, you touched a little bit upon AI, a little bit here and there. And, the IP world has evolved rapidly. I mean, you and I we can sign on that now,
Absolutely.
And especially now with the digital transformation and the AI, how have you seen the role of IP change in the recent years, and what trends or shifts have stood out the most to you?
Well, I personally think it's highly interesting with generative AI and what it might do in legal tech in general, not only with IP, because in my experience, we are moving a lot of data points around, and we've been moving those around by snail mail and by people. We've actually had, 25 years ago, people tell me they would, run with an envelope to a patent and trademark office to hand something in. And we're not that far time-wise from that situation. So I'm very pleased to see that we don't need to do that anymore. But we're still, I think, we haven't still yet fully understood how to explore generative AI, and I assume what comes next, agentic AI and all the applications. And I think once we do that, we can really say, okay, this part of the activities can be done, can be automated. And this part, we really need to again bring people to the table, because it's not about substituting humans for machines here. But given how we work, the workflows where you have various parties, you have the authorities all over the world, you have providers, you have inventors or applicants, you have a lot of players here. And from an industry perspective, you really want to maximize and make your work as efficient as possible. And that has been very tricky. The information, again, is very fragmented. And you need to be able to act on this fragmented information. But if you don't get it at the same time, it's difficult. And I believe that AI can help with that. And especially, in the translation of technical data to, what does it mean for the business? We're not there yet. You need people in between. But there is a lot of competence out there. We just haven't orchestrated it, in my mind, in a smart way. I thought several years back of, okay, we file patent applications within software, and they look very similar at the first glance. Obviously, they're unique inventions. But if you look at, for instance, the description or the background text, that's almost like copies of each other. So why can't we automate parts of that? Why do we need to pay a lot of money? So I explored, drafting, automatic drafting before we had, before November 2022, ChatGPT and OpenAI. There were actually other technologies out there that could do, semantic based and everything. So I have high faith in AI applications when it comes to legal tech, and also the field that I'm working in, the medical technology space. And we see evidence to that. Reading medical images by machine is sometimes at least equivalent, on par with medical experts, doctors. So for certain applications, I think it's very relevant and very interesting. And I think that goes for multiple things within AI or IP management, I was going to say, whether it is drafting or invention conception, even translating documents between languages, and also all the other things, sending in the formalities part.
Oh, yeah. And I think, as you said, we shouldn't see it as a threat that it will replace us, but most probably an extended arm of us, right? To help us to make this already quite difficult space we are in, right? As you said, to make it speak business than just patent language or IP language, right? And I think it's super valid. And Danielle, I have to also ask you now, I mean, we are somehow both in IP and that, which includes myself, obviously. I didn't plan on ending up here. I have to be super honest with you, and you know that very well, right? What do you think can be done to make IP a more established career path for young professionals? And how can we make it more visible as a career option? Help me out here.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot, and I'm involved in some organizations trying to promote IP as well. And I think I have a similar answer to several years back, and that is, again, decision makers aware. And I think there has been quite a heavy focus on researchers or students or academic professors not knowing or a preconception that they don't know that much about IP, therefore they need to be taught. But I've always said that, okay, but let's forget about those groups for a while. Let's talk about, university management, of granting bodies, giving millions of dollars or kronor to research, and also management within companies, industry management or boards. Decision makers needs to understand that it's not necessarily about being compliant, submitting a piece of paper. It's actually about your current and your future revenue streams and your potential growth. So we need to start talking in those terms, I think, and I think it has to be different people that does that. It's not necessarily the patent drafters or the patent law experts. I mean, they are fantastic at what they do, and I mean, really, but it's not necessarily those that are going to be able to communicate to decision makers. So I think really understanding that one size will never fit all, right? And we need to open our eyes to other professionals than just, R&D folks. R&D folks are pretty good at perceiving this space, I would say. I don't think they are the problem. And obviously we shouldn't ignore them, because from that pool of people, you're going to have some individuals that will be fantastic patent attorneys. Absolutely. But awareness, it's still a field I find that people have a lot of conceptions about, and sometimes they are wrong. And you can just look at lawsuits globally. What if some action, some business decision would have been taken at some point where you weren't even thinking about, patenting something, and what if that was distilled through to a patent applications, for instance, or a trademark? Then we're talking really strategic IP management. But yeah, I agree with you. Something needs to be done, and I think with your company have done a lot already. And it is along those lines. Bring people to the table, share the information, and make it understandable. I think that is a cornerstone to this.
Awesome. Let's end on a lighter note. Intellectual property isn't always, front and center in movies, and TV.
Right.
But it does show up in interesting ways. And obviously, if you have something in mind now, I mean, can you think of a film, series, book where IP plays, a key role?
Right.
Or maybe, one that offers an interesting take on innovation and patents?
Well, I was actually at the theater the other day, and it was about Mozart and Salieri and their relationship and what potentially could have happened. I mean, we don't know for sure. And I was really thinking about, IP from that standpoint, genius. And they showed how he improved Salieri's one piece he did to something that sounded like Mozart, that inventive step. It stood out to me. And I think that's really what IP is about. IPR is about the rights, and we have to handle them. But I mean, in order to understand IP, we have to understand the value, which is sometimes tricky to capture. What Mozart created, it has lasted 300 years. I do think it's really about that, creation ultimately, and creativity. I can't think of a movie, but I'm sure there are plenty.
Sure, but it's okay. You touched upon one of my favorite, Mozart. As a violin player, I love him, and I love it, and yes. I know exactly which part you mean with Salieri.
Yeah.
It was actually much better. The inventive step became something else with him on time.
Yeah, and then I mean, it's mind blowing to understand that. I mean, the Marriage of Figaro was only played, I think, a few times in Vienna at the opera at the time. One didn't really recognize his innovation. There was an invention, there was an authorship there, but maybe, in our times, it's spread to the market, it's become an innovation in a way. So that's, of course, why we're in this also. We want to support the ability to do innovation by IP and IPR ultimately.
Hi, Danielle. This has been a fantastic conversation, I must say so. Thank you for sharing your insights and experiences on the hard things about IP. It has been a pleasure having you on the podcast, so thank you again.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thanks for all your interesting questions. Thought-provoking sometimes and tricky at times, yeah.
That's it for today's episode on the hard things about IP. If you enjoyed this discussion, be sure to subscribe for more conversations with IP professionals. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.